Edward, you're welcome back home to Longford.
Thank you very much.
When did you first discover your love for poetry and who inspired you to commence writing? We say it was the Rebecca's influence.
I would say probably one of the first influences was lyrics. Listening to them, and because, we had a record shop, Denniston's record shop. Beckett came much later when I first read Waiting for Godot, which I regard as not a play, but a long poem. And I thought the language in it was brilliant. And then when I saw it performed, I was just taken by how simple theatre can be and how plain, ordinary language comes across as musical and witty.
Writing a poem, how do you set about starting on a new creation? And let me give you the example of a poem that you did write called Platypus.
Platypus came about by reading a little bit about evolution and animals, and the notion that the platypus was a bit of a mixed bag. He laid eggs, but he had mammary glands, so he's half mammal, half bird. And I became fascinated by that, and then I said I want to write about it. So I almost had to it was based on quite a lot of research and honing down. So if you like, it was almost like a commission in my own head. Whereas sometimes poems are feelings or moods or a line that irritates you and takes you, and you must write something. And that, to me, I felt as a very young boy. I kind of wanted to play with words.
Right. Going to the technical end of writing, we say, does traditional forms, rhyme and metre, do they enter into your concept of a narrative?
I do like writing little quick, witty couplets for myself that rhyme with a regular kind of iambic metre. But those kind of rules, I think, if you have a nurture, those rules are you learn about, but then you break them. Like a good blues musician learns the traditional blues and then he goes and turns it around on its head.
As well as poetry, you also are into drama, and you have a book, Interacting. It's a book of drama scripts. You had a little bit of trouble with your publisher on that one, hadn't you?
Yeah, I did. I was very pleased to have them. They're scripts, and they're kind of zany Beckett-like scripts. And because of my influence and where I grew up, a lot of them take place in a shop, right? And I was very lucky. A publisher in England said, yes, we like them, but when we got into it, and there's no character, it's all A or B or C, and some of them are 2 pages long, some of them are only 1 page long, and these grow out of teaching drama. So by the time I got through the process of editing them, I discovered that they wanted to promote it as you said earlier, a self-help book, that this kind of thing is good for you. I just thought, well, it's just a drama book, and we had this back and forth, and I just gave up and I said, so it has this very silly title. It's called Interacting 60 Scripts for Drama something, and for Getting On with People.
In your podcast IE, you say you don't like fussy books. Can you elaborate on that?
Did I say that?
You did.
That's I wonder, was that the physical object? If it's the physical object, that's probably true.
I think it was the physical object you referred to.
Yes. Yeah. I don't like fussy books with perhaps that play with typeface or are overly media conscious about jumping things on the page or complications. I like to keep it simple. And although with the publisher I supplied the image of the new book, but it's not busy. I like to keep it simple. And I suppose I like to keep maybe the old lyric poem needs to be fairly straightforward as well.
So, last question. Tonight you're launching your new publication.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little about it?
It's called For Crying Out Loud, and it's a term that when I say it, for crying out loud, I hear my mother. For crying out loud about various ways, my habits or other things, but I also hear other people use it, but not so much now. But it's very interesting. There's a lot of poetry. You know, it's also playing on the idea that any work of art is a crying out loud. So any work of art is, listen to me, please. It may not be that important, but I have something to say, down to a piece of graffiti on a toilet wall. So the notion of crying out loud goes back to Beckett, who had, in one early work, he said there are 4 certainties in life. And this has to do with the crying out loud. He said, you're born, you die, you exist, and for some reason or other, we can't stay quiet. And that's the notion. So it's a book of poems that are kind of crying out loud in a quiet fashion, I would hope.
Okay. Edward, thank you very much for your time, and we hope the launch goes extremely well tonight.
And thanks for being interviewed by you, Gus. It was great. That's a privilege.
Will you help me out a little bit here, please? I just want to read 1 or 2 things, and maybe you might help out in the answers. If I say to you, beside yon straggling fence that skirts the way with blossomed firs unprofitably gay, there in his noisy mansion, skilled to rule, etc., etc., who wrote that? Wonderful, Oliver Goldsmith. And now here's another one. Oh, then tell me, Sean Farrell, tell me why you hurry so. Hush, my vocal, hush and listen. And his cheeks were all aglow. Leo Casey, John Keegan Casey. And finally, and my father won't slight you for your lack of kind. She put her arms round me. These words she did say, it will not be long now till our wedding day. Pori Cullum. Why do you think that I mentioned those 3? They're all Longford, and so's our luminary of tonight is from Longford, Edward Denniston. Edward started his career in Longford, wound up in Waterford. After Trinity College, he got a job in Waterford in Newtown School, and he started into poetry. He was a teacher of English and of drama. And one of the things that his loves are dissenters, ambling and cycling without intent. Now, he'll explain that after himself. Weather watching and landscape. He has published 3 books. This will be The Point of Singing, 1999, Interacting, which is a poem, or it's not a poem, it's a book of drama scripts, and Eskimo Advice, that was an e-book, The Scale of Things, which is salmon poetry, and for tonight's one, For Crying Out Loud. I'm not going to say very much about Edward. You will hear him in a few moments, but I'd like to read a little thing. He had a podcast, and a past pupil of his heard this podcast, and I don't know whether it was a he or a she who wrote this, but they said, so nice to hear Mr. D's voice again after all these years. He was the most influential teacher I have ever had. He started me dreaming, thinking and realizing that I could be myself in a world that wanted to put me in a box of conformity and apathy. I always looked forward to his class in school, and now looking back, I realize that he appreciated and nurtured my thinking, for which I will always be thankful. He is much more than a teacher. He is an educator, and I am thankful for those years that I had the privilege of attending his classes in Newtown. I've seen Mr. D in recent years on his bike cycling along the Dunmore Road, and have had many, many fond memories of him as a teacher, an educator, a poet, and as a very nice human being. Isn't that nice to hear? Your past pupil. Ladies and gentlemen, without further from me, I give you Edward Denniston, and For Crying Out Loud.
It's of no consequence, that moment, hunkered down in the dank shelter of a white-thorn roof in a sunken double ditch, when the inky underbelly of a haymaker of a cloud shuts off its downpour, drifts on to expose a bright July sun in a meadow of seeded grass, tossed in swathed rows for pitching haycocks. That moment, before we levered ourselves up with hay forks to resume the work, when, looking out from the shade into the relit field, nothing was said. As I listened to the tick-tock-plop slowing pace on the leaves above, the intervals of quiet between, smelled the clammy damp of the ditch, soaked jackets of silent men. Safe to say, I find myself crouched down in a double ditch as a rain shower lets up, listening to drops on a leaf punctuate the moment. So this is Prostate Sonnet, and it's for Richard, Mike, Jim, John, Mark, David, and Donal. Okay, and I was in my best sonnet making form, so I hope you can hear the rhyme. The prostate gland's the gland that's in the man, secreting prostatic fluid where and when it can. Mysteriously it enlarges. After 40 years or so, puts pressure on, has nowhere else to go. Sometimes this enlarging of itself is not enough. It happens. Suppressor genes don't do their stuff, and genes begin to express themselves too much. Such fashioning over the odds of self-repair, when the whole unstoppable fecund affair needs an expert for all things prostate. Particles implanted to zap the spot, a sleight of hand surgical cut, a knowing robot, theory of everything, not interested, bad cess to nature's tenacious wildness.